I'm Michelle Marchant Johnson, and I'm so happy to welcome a first-time guest, and that is the wonderful Clayton Olson. Welcome, Clayton.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So happy to have you here. So before we get into our conversation today, I want to let everyone know just a little bit more about you, and then we'll get started. Clayton Olson is an international relationship coach, author, and NLP master practitioner. He delivers private virtual coaching sessions and leads online group workshops internationally for both women and men. Rather than teaching quick fix strategies, Clayton's coaching style works with the deeper drivers behind people's most painful experiences in relationships and adjusts those experiences so clients can secure a life they endear with a love that endures. A life they endear with a love that endures. I like that. Mm-hmm. Sounds great. So, Clayton, I'm so excited about having you here, and I know we're going to talk about some really important things here. And I really thank you for being here because I know you're in the midst of some traveling and doing some exciting things in your own life. So thanks again for being present.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I'm glad that the internet connection and the timing all worked out.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about 3 ways to make him chase you. Mm-hmm. And I think this might be a deeper conversation than it might seem just from the title. Because sometimes when we hear a title like that, Clayton, we think of like tricky little tips and tricks. And I think there's something deeper here to go into. So before we get into all of that, though, I want you to just share a little bit, if you would, from a personal standpoint on how you got into doing this work that you now do.
Yeah. Well, I've been a student of self-development for over 15 years now. Got into neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, when I was 18 years old, and was a deep student of self-awareness and looking at myself critically and in a way where I could grow and become a better person throughout my early 20s. I'd always thought to myself I wanted to be a life coach, but I thought I was too young when I was in my 20s, so I kind of took the corporate path at that point and learned a lot about psychology, learned a lot about sales. And at one point I decided it was time to split from that and pursue something that felt a little bit more gritty and a little bit more close to my heart. So what ended up happening is I started working with another friend who had a list of folks that were going through breakups and were going through one of the most emotionally devastating times of their lives, having a wife, a husband, girlfriend, boyfriend that had left them. And they were in a really desperate spot, trying to get themselves back, trying to get back on their feet. And so over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, I've been working with a tremendous amount of people one-on-one, helping them get back to a place of equanimity within themselves, begin to examine the patterns in their life that actually got them to that place where the breakup had occurred, and help them develop new beliefs and new strategies so they could go into relationships and do something different the second time around. Through doing that work and seeing all of the patterns that were causing relationships to fail, and even the patterns that were causing the healthy relationships to last, I started moving more and more into giving relationship advice to women, relationship advice to men. And now I really handle the full gamut of working with anybody that has individuals that are going through any type of struggle or challenge with relationship, whether they're single or they're in a relationship or they're on the tail end of one, it's ending. I love it all. And I feel that there's something I can offer to people in all of those different stages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So in terms of our topic today, why don't you go ahead and start by telling us the first idea that you'd like to share with us about making someone chase you, which again, I know is going to lead us into a really wonderful conversation.
Yes. Yeah. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head where whenever we hear these titles, these catchy titles of make him chase you, they can get our attention. And sometimes we're looking for gimmicks and tricks. But my goal really in this interview, Michelle, is to begin to open up some truths about what makes a woman attractive, that are deeper and perhaps are said in a way that you haven't heard before. So the first idea, the first concept here is something that I call being in rapport with being single. So what that means is many of the women that I've worked with who are suffering, who are wanting a relationship and feeling like they can't get into one, or in a relationship where they feel like they're compromising themselves, all have something in common. And what that thread is that there is this rejection of them being single. There is this making wrong that they're single. There's this fear of being single. There's this fear of being alone. And oftentimes what happens when you have this deep fear of being single or this deep fear of being alone, there's certain compromises that you make in your relationships with people. And there are almost reactionary patterns that you have when picking a partner. Because you've got this fear of being single nipping at your heels. So it's almost like you're not intentionally moving forward towards what it is that you really want, but rather you're running away from what I like to call the abyss of being single. You're running away from it into almost anybody's arms that'll take care of you, that'll catch you. And that can lead to really bad and unhealthy relationship patterns. It can also lead to a lack of presence in the relationship. It can lead to a lack of intimacy because you're not fully in the relationship by choice, but rather you're just trying to escape from a fear that you haven't dealt with. So that's really the first place to begin to examine is how can you begin to actually befriend and create being alone an ally in your life? How can you begin to appreciate actually being single and stop running from it, but find the joy, the power, the gratitude in being single? Because from that place, what happens is you find your center, you find your balance, and the choices you make around men, the choices you make around being able to flirt and being able to develop boundaries become so much more online. They become so much more powerful and conscious. So I'm going to stop right there. Does that land? Does that make sense?
It does land. It does land for sure. And I'm thinking back to my own years of being single because I met and married my husband, becoming a first-time bride at age 43. And I know I went through a period of time during those years of being single where I really did have a deep fear of being alone. And what you're talking about really is resonating because during that period of time, I did not make wise relationship choices. I was kind of getting into relationships more by default rather than by choice.
Yes. Yeah,
I call it. That really does resonate.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful reflection. And it's almost as if one can get into a relationship by accident then rather than relationship on purpose. And it's an easy way to, it's kind of like you're using the relationship at that point as salvation from something internally that you haven't dealt with, rather than using the relationship as a platform to truly build something beautiful from. It's using the relationship as a tourniquet to stop the bleeding of being single, the fear of being alone. And so this internal shift is something that is one that I invite people to begin to look at within themselves, that if you want to really create an outstanding relationship and build a foundation with a man that lasts, it really starts with the relationship that you have with yourself and how in rapport and how much of a friend you can be to your current experience, rather than trying to run from it, rather than thinking it's broken, trying to fix it, and that the relationship it comes and suddenly now you'll be delivered back to the Garden of Eden, to use that metaphor, right? It's finding that peace and that power and that gratitude now, and then acting from that place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I love this idea, and I think it's so incredibly powerful, and I'm so grateful that you led with this. And I'm thinking I'm not the only woman. Obviously, you're talking about this. You've seen this as a theme, and I'm thinking I'm not the only woman who's fallen into that pattern at some point in their life, and there may be some people going through that now. So what are some of the ways we can really befriend that the experience of being single? I know you mentioned gratitude. I know you mentioned peace. But for women out there that are saying, well, this sounds like a great idea, but how do I really do that? What makes that possible for me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So I'll give you one access point here, and then there may be some more that surface. But one that comes to mind is beginning to become aware of your self-talk. Begin to really get in touch with what are the things that you're telling yourself in single. What are some of the things that you're saying to yourself, perhaps when you're journaling around being single? Are you compassionate with yourself? Are you beating yourself up? Are you asking questions that you really don't want the answers to? Like, why me? Why does this never happen for me? Oh, he's just going to leave me again, isn't he? Like, looking at where you may be really rejecting the experience, being harsh on yourself, and not speaking to yourself as a friend. Okay, so that's the first step, is becoming aware of that internal dialogue and noticing how you're talking to yourself and pitting yourself against yourself. And you can do this by journaling. You can do this by talking into an audio recorder. You can do this by working with a coach or a therapist and having somebody reflect back the beliefs and the self-talk that you say that can be challenged with a little bit more love and acceptance and awareness. And from there, it's beginning to consciously choose, how do you want to talk to yourself in this situation? How can you actually begin to change the experience and speak to yourself lovingly? Speak to yourself almost as if you were speaking to a daughter or a niece or a son who may have this fear. How would you comfort them? How would you provide them security? And actually speaking to that part, that younger part of yourself that may be activated there in that way. Practicing giving yourself the reassurance, regulating your own emotional experience with language that is supportive and accepting and compassionate. And what this does is it begins to also set in place a model to where when speaking to yourself compassionately becomes familiar and it becomes a model in which you communicate with yourself, you are that much more likely to be able to identify quality men and people that will also speak to you that way in your life.
Mm. Yeah, I think this is incredibly important and powerful too. And it's so interesting when we do start paying close attention to our own self-talk, how often we would find ourselves speaking to ourselves in a way that we would never in a million years speak to anyone else. In other words, it can be really a form of self-abuse if we're not watching that carefully.
Yeah, beautiful. It's you put it very eloquently, and that's unfortunately that is what it can be, as self-abuse. Something else that comes to mind while you were talking here was this element of just even beginning to look at the experience of being single and just simply starting to ask the questions, what good thing comes? What is the benefit of being single? What is the opportunity that I have now that I can take advantage of while being single that I perhaps won't be able to when suddenly I have to run my decisions through someone else's nervous system, right? Because that's the reality of a relationship, is suddenly you've got another person's nervous system that is intertwining with yours. And your freedom is definitely adjusted. Perhaps self-care can also be adjusted as well, because there's somebody else that you're looking out for. So how can you begin to appreciate and look at being single as an opportunity? And what are some of the things that you still want to do, or some of the things that the ways you want to take care of yourself now, or the experiences that you want to have, and actually beginning to do those and really appreciate the opportunity and the space that you have when you don't have a partner in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really well put. I think for so many of the experiences of life, whether it be being single or another thing that we might consider to be a challenge or something that we feel like we'd like to have be different in our lives, it's really important to look for the opportunity and to look for the blessings and the gifts in each part of life's experiences. I mean, I know myself, I'm a cancer survivor, which sounds like a terrible experience, and I'm not going to say it was fun. But I can tell you there were gifts and blessings in that experience. I experienced some profound experiences in my life that are incredibly valuable to me and deepen my understanding about a lot of things about myself and a lot of things about life. And I'm not necessarily comparing being single with cancer, but what I am saying is that every experience of life has some gifts and some blessings inherent in them if we can choose to find them and see them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I think I heard a quote, and I don't know who said this, but it's one that is always there in the background that sums up what you're saying in some ways, is this, that the experiences that often seem painful and the ones and that perhaps seem unnecessary are often what create the container for the joy, the happiness, and the gratitude to occur within. And when we're trying to reject the painful experiences and seeing them as unnecessary, or we're turning away from them, we're actually compromising the container in which those good things can actually come into our lives. Mm-hmm. So when we can turn towards the cancer, turn towards the loss, turn towards the suffering, and say yes to the experience, in the sense of, I'm going to experience this, I'm going to feel it, and not necessarily make it wrong. I believe that we really build up a bandwidth to experience some of the highest highs in life at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. So in addition to embracing, loving, accepting, whatever the words we want to use are singlehood, mm-hmm. being single, the experience of being single, and the gifts and opportunities inherent therein, what other advice would you offer to the women out there?
Yeah. And now are we talking about moving on to point number 2? Is that what we're saying? Okay. Yeah. Well, this is a wonderful dovetail with your explanation and description of what you got from going through cancer and surviving and coming out the other end and talking about the gifts. What I see, what I'm really appreciating about hearing you say that, is how it has enhanced and enriched your perspective, or perhaps your lens on life. And really, this next point is beginning to adopt a lens or a perspective of seeing life as beautiful. Not just seeing life as beautiful, but seeing people as beautiful and seeing yourself as beautiful. And not doing it because you feel like it, but rather doing it because as a choice, as choosing to actively looking for ways in which the world is beautiful, that you are beautiful, that other people are beautiful. Because when I think about what is it that we actually have to offer in a relationship to someone else when we get into connection with them? What is it that we really offer? And I don't think it's anything that we're necessarily doing. And I don't necessarily think that it's anything physical that we have, but rather it is actually our perspective, which makes us a valuable, irreplaceable partner. And so when we can begin to move into a perspective that brings beauty into our lives, and as a woman can also begin to bring beauty into a man's often black and white world, you give him an experience that he doesn't get from his friends or his family. You give him an experience that he may not even get from his work or from anything. And so adopting a perspective of beauty, of beginning to choose to see life, yourself, and other people as beautiful, it adds a rich dimension of color to a man's very performative, oftentimes mechanistic, black and white, very point A to point B mentality. And it can be this really rich gateway. You as a woman can have this, you can serve as a gateway that allows a man to experience more parts of himself, more parts of life and experience through you, through your perspective, through your emotional experience. So I'm going to stop right there. That's the concept. Curious how that's landing on your side.
Well, I find it really fascinating and, again, really, really important. And I don't know, since we're speaking to women, Clayton, yes. I don't know how many women really understand deeply what you're talking about in terms of this black and white kind of experience that men have, many men have, as kind of their baseline experience in life. And I'd like for you to speak to that just a little bit more, because
Yes.
again, I think this may be a new concept to many women. And I love the idea that, having the right woman in their lives can add so much color and dimension. But I think from your male perspective, you could add a little more to that, because I think this may not be something that a lot of women know intuitively.
Great. Thank you for pointing that out. And I'm more than happy to. So I can speak for myself, and I can also speak for, I believe, many men that are raised in the West, is that there's a very limited scope of acceptable emotions that a man is typically allowed to experience from his father, from his peer group as he grows up. There is anger, perhaps pride. There is sadness and weakness, and perhaps love and connection, and all the other colors of the emotional palette. Some of them may be seen as weak or not manly, or the man might be shamed for it. The man might be shamed for crying or having an emotional experience, or perhaps being able to even appreciate beauty growing up. He might be seen as feminine. He might be outcasted from his peer group. So this happens over time, and what it creates is a very narrow scope of how the masculine identity arises in our culture. And because of that, there is this almost like locked upness that men can have, where they're not allowed to connect with their peer group. They're not allowed to cry. They're not allowed to really appreciate art, perhaps in the same way that women are allowed to. Culturally speaking, I'm making some generalizations here. And what that means is that there is this pressure within men. There is this pressure, there's this competition, there is this very narrow scope that men can typically walk down and feel okay. And what that does is it presents a massive opportunity for a woman who has more access, more readily available access to her own emotional experience, to beauty, to poetry, to seeing life as something that's lovely, to even access her own sadness. All those things become so valuable to the guy because they're experiences that perhaps he is not even allowing himself to have. So when he is in touch with a woman who is allowing herself to have those experiences, he gets to suddenly feel back in touch with something that he may have disowned as a child, that he may have not felt in 20, 30 years. And what it does, the experience that it can create for a man, and I speak from firsthand experience, is it can, when you meet a woman who is able to bring this type of richness, this type of emotional experience to the interactions, and you're able to be in contact with that, it almost feels like coming home. It feels like being reintroduced to parts of myself that I haven't seen in a really, really long time. And there's something so incredibly valuable about that. And it has very little to do with how she looks or how old she is or what she has or how much money she makes or her relationship past. It has everything to do with, is she giving herself permission to be herself and to feel and to realize that her emotions are so valuable to men that are locked up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was really beautifully said, and I really appreciate you expanding on that. I often think about what it must be like, being in this work. I think about men a lot. I'm doing this entire series interviewing men, and I think, how often do you see men really complimenting each other? That's usually not the case. They're more in competition with each other, or really connecting on a deep level in the way that we as women often do with each other, with our friends. I think most men just don't have access to a lot of that experience. And I think that it must be very lonely at times.
You got it. Yeah. Yeah. I look at my clients and it's across the board. The men that are broken up with have such a more difficult time dealing with the breakup than women. Women tend to bounce back from things much quicker. And there's research around this, and also from just personal experience working as a coach with people, it's women do not have any shame around reaching out for support and help when they need it. And I've seen guys that are on the verge of suicide because they can't bring themselves to open up and ask for the help that they need to be able to have somebody that they can cry with, be able to have somebody that can really embrace the weakest part of what they're feeling and tell them it's going to be okay. And there is, it's unfortunate. And there's perhaps a lot of learning and evolution that can happen inside the male psyche around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to ask you another question about this, if it's okay, before we move on to the third piece. And that is, so you touched on this already, which is that what you're talking about here doesn't necessarily have to do with a woman's age or her physical attributes. It's really more about who she is being and her being real and vulnerable and sharing herself. It's more about who she's showing up as. Yeah. But there are women out there, I know, in this audience who are feeling older, who are feeling like they're maybe not attractive. I know there are women that are maybe hearing this that are saying, well, this idea of me feeling in touch with my own beauty and seeing the beauty of the universe is a lovely idea. But again, I would love to ask you, how do we do that? How do we, what are some ideas on how we can really tap into that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am a firm believer, and I just invite anyone listening that can connect with what you said to see beauty as something that is much deeper than your physical appearance, but rather it's a narrative in you. It's a song that you have within you. It's the ways that you treat yourself. Going back to the first point, it's the acceptance of where you're at, and the letting go of comparison to other people, and beginning to consciously look for the best in people that you meet. And the more that you can begin to see people outside of yourself as beautiful and consciously choose that, you will naturally begin to transform into someone where you can begin to see the beauty within you as well. I'm a very firm believer of that. And I also want to say too, that the more that a woman can own how she looks, the more that she can accept how she looks and realize that beauty is not surface level, what she begins to access is actually her own sexiness and her own confidence. Because sexiness has nothing to do with what you look like. It has everything to do with how fully you are you. How much are you owning exactly where you're at and not being ashamed of it, and not looking at yourself as broken or that you need to be fixed, but showing up fully and knowing that you deserve love, knowing that you deserve connection, knowing that you deserve partnership, not based on how you look, but because you're alive and because you have something to offer, which is your life stance, which is the way that you see the world, which is the ways that you can connect to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, it's a beautiful perspective. And it reminds me a little bit of an experience that I had in coaching a woman a few years back who was quite overweight. And during one of our coaching sessions, she said something like, well, I'll be able to experience love once I can lose this weight. And I said to her, well, what if we'd like kind of reverse that? And what if you said, once you can experience more love for yourself, once you can show yourself more love and more acceptance, then maybe the weight will release itself, or you'll be able to be perfectly content and happy exactly as you are. And lo and behold, she really worked with that idea over a period of several months, and that's exactly what happened for her. It was
wonderful
really
example. Wonderful example. Yeah, beautiful. Exactly. It's this inside out approach rather than this outside in approach. Mm-hmm. Yeah, of changing the relationship you are having with yourself, and then allowing that to bleed outwards rather than thinking that you need to change all these external things. Like, I need to get plastic surgery, or I need to have all these things outside of myself. I need to get into a relationship first before I finally feel worthy of one. It's like, well, wait a second. That's an interesting way to look at it, right? What if we reverse that? And that's why I do believe coming onto these summits and being opened up to these ideas so you can begin to flirt with them and play with them as possible frames of reality, and working with a coach or studying this type of material is just so important to beginning to make that shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it reminds me how often we feel unworthy of being loved because we recognize our own imperfections. It's almost like there's this voice inside of us sometimes that says, if someone really knew the real me, I would be completely rejected and unlovable. And the irony there is that I think that showing up in a real and authentic way is really a big part of what makes intimacy possible, because it also makes it safe for the other person to show their real self and their imperfections as well. And yet so often I find myself telling people, and also myself, we don't have to be perfect in order to be lovable.
Yeah. Yeah, I second that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think trying to be perfect is the exact block that gets in the way of any type of connection from forming, because you're not even relatable at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And think of what a burden it would be to be with a perfect person, right?
Oh my God, it would be exhausting.
It would be exhausting.
Yeah. And I see those relationships. I mean, they're really built on a house of cards at that point. Because they're built on an image. It's almost like two cardboard cutouts coming together rather than two real people. And when the relationship fails, it's the representatives that are breaking up rather than the people themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I know the third idea that you want to talk about, and I'm really excited about this too, Clayton, is the idea of boundaries.
Yes.
And maintaining boundaries and dancing with this within the context of a relationship. So share with us your thoughts about that, if you would.
Yeah. So there's this concept, there's two pieces to it, and I'll throw it out here like this. It's learning how to give men the green light while simultaneously holding your boundaries to a very high regard within yourself. So there's a play of opposites happening here that creates a concoction of really just magnetism. Because if you're just giving a guy the green light, you may end up coming off as desperate, or you may end up compromising yourself, or you may end up in this box of relationship at all costs, maybe sleeping with a man too quickly, possibly chasing him. Right. So the green light is if it's blown up too much, this is what it can end up looking like. Now, if you've got too many boundaries and you don't have any green light at all, you're going to be inaccessible. You'll be impenetrable. In fact, the man's experience when he's around you, if you've got too many locked up boundaries without any green light, is you're not really available for a relationship. You're not really available for this man to come in and love you. And what his experience will be then is one of, I feel that even trying to be with this woman, there's a sense of inadequacy that comes up within me because I don't even know if I'm good enough to be with her. So the balance here, the dance is being able to give the green light and maintain your own boundaries. So there's an openness while also a connected to your values happening simultaneously. Now, the openness, and I'll give you an example here. I've often found that many of the women that I've worked with that have a really hard time flirting with sexual energy and being able to play with it and being able to dance in the conversation with a guy and really allow that to build and just own the desire and have it go into like really wonderful, beautiful directions are the ones that actually have a really hard time with boundaries. They have a really hard time. They don't really know what their boundaries are. And so what happens, it creates this sense of insecurity within them. So they feel locked up and they feel very afraid of putting themselves in situations with guys where maybe the conversation turns sexual or where maybe he might be advancing because they don't really know where they stand. And so the more a woman can get solid with her boundaries around perhaps when she is going to sleep with a guy, around how she wants to be talked to, around, and now this is not just with him, but it's even in her life. What are the foods that you're putting into your body? What does your workout schedule look like? Do you have boundaries around your free time? right? How are you living a balanced life, and how are those boundaries serving you there? That security, that knowledge of self actually then allows you to be in conversation with men, and with much more relaxedness and playfulness, being able to give the green light and play with the energy and flirt and charm and have a great time with him that is co-creative rather than restricted and shut down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a really important idea. And I think there's a lot of confusion and a lot of challenge around this, because I don't know if a lot of women have the clear definition around some of these questions that you put out there. When they feel comfortable sleeping with a guy, when they want to allow things to progress in that way, and how to express themselves or navigate that and let someone know that. So that's actually a question, since I brought that up, that I'd like to ask you. First of all, there's two questions here. How does a woman get deeper clarity around their boundaries? And then the second question would be, can you model or give an example of how a woman can express in a way that a man could hear her feelings or her desires and be more likely to respond to it if he's wanting to move things faster than she?
Beautiful. Okay. I love that you put me on the spot there. I'm going to start with the second question first, and I'm going to go back to the first one. Okay. So the second one being, can I model what a conversation might look like where a woman is able to express her boundaries in a way to a guy if he's wanting to advance things sexually? So one way of doing that would be to realize that number one, you're dealing with a human being who is attracted to you, and that in and of itself is flattering, and that is special, and that doesn't mean that you have to give into it, but it could be something to the effect of, listen, I'm really attracted to you as well. So say that he advances. It could be like, say, listen, I want to slow down here. I'm really attracted to you as well. And one of the things that I hold myself to is I really want to feel connected to you before we proceed any further. And I think it's just going to take me a little bit more time, but I really can't wait to get to know you and to continue to hang out. So it's really giving him a compliment, and it's honoring yourself, and it's not throwing up some major block where it's saying, God, what kind of person do you think I am? Is that all you want me for? I knew that you just wanted me for sex, or to shut down and feel like insulted by the guy's sexual advance. It's more like, I'm going to catch your sexual advance in my hands, and I'm going to honor that it's there and say, wow, this is special. Thank you. I actually feel the same way too. And I'd like to slow down because I want to feel more connected with you. And I know that it's just going to take a little bit more time, and I can't wait for us to get more connected, or I can't wait to continue to see you. Right. And that allows the man to see like, oh, wow, my masculine desire did not just get thwarted and shut down and blocked by a brick wall, but rather she received me, and then she redirected, acknowledged it. And now we're almost on the same team building something together. And see, when you approach it that way too, you get to see what kind of man he is. How does he respond to that boundary, right? That's set in a way where you're not triggered, where you're not something emotionally reacting to it, but rather you're gently redirecting it. How does he handle your authentic truth there? Does he regress into a child and try to blame you, which will tell you a lot about him? Does he become a gentleman and right there in the moment handle it with grace and respect and continue to hang out with you? So these are all learning opportunities, right? So if a man is advancing and you're feeling like you want to move things slower, what a beautiful opportunity to express things that way and learn more about him, to really see whether or not you want to hang out with him and build something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that response. I think that was so beautiful. And I think that it's so important to recognize the compassion for another human being who is attracted to you, and to honor that in this way. And I think that by doing this with some sensitivity and with some kindness, it can really, like you said, let you know so much more about a man, and it can still be very honoring to yourself as a woman. And I think one thing that happens often, and I feel badly about this, is that women sometimes get like upset and blame and shame men for having those sexual desires. I mean, that happens a lot. And of course, I'm not talking about, anything that's not consensual or, rape or sexual violence when I refer to this. I mean, that's obviously in a whole category of on its own. And we're not talking about that specifically today. But in the context of a healthy dating relationship, it's so important to handle these topics with, like the way you modeled it, with some compassion and with some kindness and with honoring that other person as well as honoring yourself and your own boundaries.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
I think that was really well modeled. And I just, I do think that the way you started that out, where you're sharing, if you are attracted to the man but you're not ready yet to get more intimate or sexually involved, to let him know that you're attracted to him.
Yeah. Right. That doesn't mean that you have to sleep with him right there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because I think most good men are willing to go the distance and continue to explore the relationship opportunity if they know that the woman, is also interested in them.
And that's an example right there of giving the green light while maintaining boundaries.
Exactly.
Right? The green light there is still saying, hey, we're still, the intersection is, the road is clear. I want to go through this, but just let's take it a little bit slower, because there's certain things that I need to feel. There's certain things that I would like to honor with myself before we go that road, right? Rather than just a massive red light with the railroad guards coming down to block all advances.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think also in this Me Too era and things like that, I think men need a green light in a lot of situations. I think some men are probably kind of gun shy in certain situations with women. And so I think that can be really important. Can I ask you one other question about this green light idea?
Yeah, please.
So I know there's a lot of confusion out there in terms of women kind of making the first move. And I think women making the first move in terms of maybe asking a man out or that sort of thing might be different than what we're talking about in terms of green light. But how do women give the green light in situations like if they want a man to ask her out, but he maybe hasn't gotten around to it, whether she's interacting with him online or in person? Do you have any ideas for that?
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about text message, possibly,
yeah,
or
it could
over
be
Messenger or something like that,
or over a dating app or site, or even in person. How does a woman green light and let a man know she would be open to him asking her out without going right to the asking him out? I think most women would still prefer that if they had the choice.
Yeah. Okay. So just what comes to mind is make it easy for the guy to set it up so he can knock it down. Okay. Set it up so he can find it. What I mean when I say that is if you're in conversation with the guy, let him know what you like doing. Let him know restaurants that you want to go to. Let him know experiences. I mean, these are things that you can drop in subtly, things that you would love to do. And it could be that you ask him that question first, something about his passions, something of maybe perhaps that is on the bucket list for him within the current city that you're living in, and then share yours. So give him these ideas, give him this ammunition to where he's not wondering, okay, if I ask her on a date, is it going to be good enough or am I going to get rejected by her? You've given him some insight into the things that you want to do perhaps around the city. And now all he's got to do is just simply ask. And it's doing some of the work for him, but you're not declawing him or stepping too far into the masculine polarity and initiating, but you're setting it up and allowing him then to almost kind of grab the low hanging fruit and you're giving him ideas indirectly, you're feeding him ideas indirectly. So he has that part of it done for him. So all he's got to do is just step forward and ask.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way I would imagine giving the green light in that scenario.
Mm-hmm. So an example of that might be something like, if you're in conversation online or in person, saying, what are your favorite restaurants in the city, or what's your favorite international cuisine? And then ask what's your favorite Indian restaurant or Italian restaurant or whatever he said.
What's one or two things you really want to do in the city? Like if you only had 5 days left in the city, what are one or two things you'd absolutely have to do before you left that you haven't done yet? And then he might say something, and if one of those things is great, be like, oh my God, I would love to do that at some point. I would love to do that sometime.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's what mine are. I would love to do this. At that point, it's open, right? It's open. I mean, there's ideas there percolating. All he's got to do is say, hey, all right, here's the date, here's the time. The ideas, you guys have a shared reality around what both of you are connected to, around what you both want to do. And now it's just a matter of him being able to make that invitation, rather than suddenly have to sit in the back and be like, well, I don't even know what she likes. I don't really know whether she might say no because she doesn't want to do that. She might say no because she doesn't like me. You're answering some of these questions in his mind already, because you're making it easy for him to then be able to initiate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So really, we're creating an opening. We're creating that opening and setting him up to know how to be successful.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, Clayton, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, because I really, really loved this conversation, and it's been so much fun. Yeah. And I really feel like you've shared some really big gems here. And I know that many of the women here will really resonate with what you've shared. So thank you so much, first of all.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Clayton, I'll let you give the last word here in just a moment. Just kind of a parting thought for the ladies, a word of encouragement or last bit of advice. But before we do that, I also want to thank all of the women here who are joining us, because the fact that you're here and that you're willing to explore these new ideas in your life says something really positive about you, that you're committed to creating an amazing life and deep love for yourself. And so we honor you and appreciate your presence. So Clayton, I want to just give you an opportunity to just wrap up with a last closing thought, if you like.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I feel pretty complete with what we talked about. So I don't have necessarily anything for the listeners, other than I just want to thank you for such some great questions and your presence and your reflections, because I didn't think we were going to talk about some of these topics as long as we did, and it was just so rich and engaging. You're a great interviewer, and really brought a great energy to this phone call. So thank you for making it such a pleasurable experience for me. It's been a great last hour.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for joining me and for your generous contribution and for your time and for your presence as well, because for me it was just a joy to be in conversation with you, and I know this is going to be so valuable to so many women. So thank you for what you're doing in the world, and thank you again for being here today.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies, thank you for your presence. Bye-bye for now.